We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. Just got off work. It's 7:32 a.m. I have today off, and I am taking today off. I'm going to start taking more days off now that we've been doing pretty good financially, knock on wood. That and honestly, Trump sent, two $600 checks where it's me and my wife, So that helped out a lot. So I can take days off, start cleaning up the house a little more, fixing some things up around here. Like we need small stuff like shelves, dressers, stuff that if you keep up with the channel earlier this year, you kind of know. We were couch surfing for a little bit, so we kind of need to buy some furniture stuff, which is, cool. I'm kind of tired of living out of boxes, and I really don't want to piss my landlord off if he comes in and, oh, this dude's living out of boxes, So, but yeah, so I'm going to take more days off instead of working 6 days a week, working my finger to the bone, which means more podcasts, more videos, because me and my wife, we like to do cryptozoology hunts. We like to do ghost hunting, hiking. We do a lot of hiking, Right now it's kind of cold to do a lot of that stuff, but during the summer, man, we do a ton of different little adventures that are just cheap, in your backyard. A lot of people in Kentucky, man, they're always saying they're bored, and it's like, dude, there's so much stuff to do around here. It's redonkulous. It's just, you got to look for it, We have this beautiful thing called the internet. I did want to respond to a couple of comments. First off, thank you. I'm glad people are commenting because it kind of lets me know what you guys like, what you guys don't like. I had a commenter on one of my Native American videos, which basically they were saying, hey, I love this channel. I'm so glad I found this channel. And I love how you do different subjects. So, that being said, today's episode is on the whipping post, which is, I've been doing kind of a mini series of different torture devices, for those who are fans of the macabre, yes, it's Conspiracy Corner Podcast, but I like to just honestly keep this channel just kind of weird subjects like paranormal, aliens, conspiracy theories, sometimes like horror, like torture devices. I've done plenty of podcasts on that, and that's what today's episode is. And honestly, too, like another one that I want to start getting into is like serial killers. Different serial killers that I find interesting, and I know the conspiracy crowd will probably be like, well, that's going way off base and stuff, and it's like, is it though? I mean, 2020, Joe Rogan just had a guy on his show that wrote a book talking about basically how Charles Manson was CIA MK Ultra. So, just saying. I think everything ties together, Ted Bundy was a member of the Bundy family, which is one of the 13 bloodlines. He was adopted, but still, you connect the dots. There's a lot of Eileen Wuornos. I'm starting to believe that she was government controlled. I think a lot of these serial killers, they send out on purpose for certain missions to do certain things for whatever nefarious reason. They get caught when the elite want them to be caught. So, but yes, as response to that comment, sorry I went a little off track. I try to keep this channel doing different subjects in general. Each episode I try to make sure it's a different subject from the last episode. When I first started this channel, we didn't have internet, and I was actually recording podcast without internet, without my books, because all my books were in storage. So it kind of started out, honestly, a lot of paranormal stuff. So I try not to stay on one subject episode after episode after episode, because that turns a lot of people off, But the second comment that I kind of wanted to respond to was I put out the last episode I put out. Check it out if you haven't watched it, if you're interested in ancient astronaut theory. I kind of said in the video, hey, if you guys want me to do a part 2, because I left it on a cliffhanger, because it's a story, let me know in the comments, and someone did. So I will do a sequel to that. I plan on doing that next episode, since someone actually did comment, hey, I want to hear more of this. So you guys control the show at the end of the day, So if you guys want to hear more of certain things, I'll try my best to get to the subject or whatever. But that's all I wanted to say. Comment. Let me know what you guys want. But yeah, I mean, this channel is, at the end of the day, I do say it is an adult channel. So even if a subject if you think it's too dark, I guarantee you it's probably not too dark for me. I mean, today's episode is literally on a torture device. So don't be like scared to just be like, oh, I don't know if he'd cover that. I probably would. And as long as I got the time to research, or if I know enough about it, I like to know, But I do thank all my new subs, and thank you all for all my old subs who've stuck with me for 3 years, because I've been on here for 3 years, But let's get on with the show. Today's episode is a torture device called the whipping post. The whipping post. John Taylor, the water poet, wrote in 1630, "In London, and within a mile, I ween, there are jails or prisons full 15, and 60 whipping posts in stocks and cages." Church and city records throughout England show how constantly these whipping posts were made to perform their share of legal and restrictive duties. In the reign of Henry VIII, yeah, he's a whole episode just himself, which, hey, I wouldn't mind doing an episode on him. He was a maniac. A famous whipping act had been passed by which all vagrants were to be whipped severely at the cart tail, till the body became bloody by reason of such whipping, quote unquote. This enactment remained in force nearly through the reign of Elizabeth, when the whipping post became the usual substitute for the cart. But the force of the blows was not lightened. The poet Cowper has left in one of his letters an amusing account of sanguinary whipping which he witnessed. The thief had stolen some ironwork at a fire at Olney in 1783, and had been tried and sentenced to be whipped at the cart tail. And this is his quote. The fellow seemed to show great fortitude, but it was all imposition. The beadle who whipped him had his left hand filled with red ochre, which is OCHRE. I'm not sure what that means. Through which, after every stroke, he drew the lash of the whip, leaving the appearance of a wound upon the skin, but in reality not hurting him at all. This being perceived by the constable who followed the beadle to see that he did his duty. The constable applied the cane, without any such management or precaution, to the shoulders of the beadle. The scene now became interesting and exciting. God, back then, man, before internet and television and radio, like, people just were, like, dying for excitement, like, any form of entertainment. And people bash them for that, you know? Like, you gotta think, like, the Vatican and the Catholic, like, basically forbid like anyone from reading. Most people couldn't read. There's like barely any entertainment, you know, like I'm sure gambling was a crime or sin, or playing cards. I mean, if you look at the origin of playing cards and the whole gypsies and, you know, like, I don't blame them in a way for finding torture or coliseums or anything in entertainment, you know. Is it sick? Yes, but when you have zero entertainment whatsoever, it's kind of like, yeah, I kind of don't blame them. The beadle could by no means be induced to strike the thief hard, which provoked the constable to strike harder, and so the double flogging continued until a lass of Silverend, pitying the pitiful beadle thus suffering under the hands of the pitiless constable, joined the procession, and placing herself immediately behind the constable, seized him by his capillary pigtail, and pulling him backwards by the same, slapped his face with Amazonian fury. This concentration of events has taken more of my paper than I intended, but I could not forbear to inform you how the beadle thrashed the thief, the constable the beadle, and the lady the constable, and how the thief was the only person who suffered nothing. Damn, it turned into like a train of beating, pretty much. As a good, sound British institution, and to have familiar, home-like surroundings in the new strange land, the whipping post was promptly set up, and the whip set at work in all the American colonies. In the orders sent over from England from the restraint of the first settlement at Salem, whipping was enjoined, as correction is ordained for the fool's back, and fool's back soon found the correction. Tawny skills and white shared alike in punishment, and both Indians and white men were partakers in crime. Scourgings were sometimes given on Sabbath days and often on lecture days, to the vast content of edification of Salem folk. So there you go, back to Salem again. I do plan on doing a Salem witch trials episode, definitely. The whipping post was speedily in full force in Boston. At the session of the court held November 30th, 1630, one man was sentenced to be whipped for stealing a loaf of bread, another for shooting fowl on the Sabbath, another for swearing. Dang, just for cussing you get the shit whipped out of you. Another for leaving a boat without a pilot. P-Y-L-O-T-T, whatever that is. Then we read of John Peace, that for striking his mother and deriding her, he shalt be whipped. In 1631, in June, this order was given by the General Court in Boston, that Philip Ratcliffe, I've heard that name before, Ratcliffe, that's an actor, I believe. Or no, he might be Radcliffe. But they did change a lot of names in Ellis Island in New York and stuff when immigrants came over. So it might be the same. Same bloodline. Philip Ratcliffe shall be whipped, have his ears cut off, Jesus, fined £40, and banished out of the limits of this jurisdiction for uttering malicious and scandalous speeches against the government. Oh, so basically an anarchist. Yeah, I don't know. I talk trash about the government all the time. I can't imagine being whipped, my ears cut off, fined £40, which was probably a lot of money, and then banished, Governor Winthrop added to his account of this affair that Ratcliffe was convict most foul, slanderous invectives against our government. This episode and the execution of this sentence caused much reprehension and unfavorable comment in England, where, it would seem, whipping and ear-lopping were rife enough to be little noted. But the mote in our brother's eyes seemed very large when seen across the water. Anent it, in a letter written from London to the governor's son, I read, I have heard divers complaints against the severity of your government, and cutting off the lunatic man's ears, and other grievances. In 1630, Henry Lynn of Boston was sentenced to be whipped. He wrote to England, against the government and execution of justice here, and was again whipped and banished. Lying, swearing, taking false toll, perjury, selling rum to the Indians, all were punished by whipping. By the way, yes, they use Indians. This is literally a source which I've talked about before. It's Curious Punishments of Bygone Days. It's a reprint from it's literally a pamphlet reprint from 1851. So, yes, they called them Indians back then. By the way, like, I'm part Native American. It doesn't really offend me. So if it offends you, no offense. You're kind of sensitive. Women were not spared in public chastisement. The gift of prophecy was at once subdued in Boston by lashes, as were unwomanly carriage. On February 30th, in 1638, the sentence was rendered. Anne Ux, her last name is literally UX, so Anne Ux, Richard Walker, being cast out of the Church of Boston for intemperate drinking from one end to another, and for light and wanton behavior, was the next day called before the governor and treasurer, and convicted by 2 witnesses, and was stripped naked one shoulder, and tied to the whipping post by her, but her punishments was respited. Every year, every month, and in time every week, fresh whippings followed. No culprits were, however, to be beaten more than 40 stripes as one sentence, and the body of Liberties decreed that no true gentleman or any man equal to a gentleman shall be punished by whipping unless his crime be very shameful and his course of life vicious and profligate. And pursuance of this nation of the exemption of the aristocracy from bodily punishment. A Boston witness testified in one flagrant case as a condonement of the offense that the culprit, quote, had been a soldier and was a gentleman, and they must have their liberties, unquote. And he urged letting the case default, and to, quote, make no uproar, unquote, in the matter. The lines of social position were just as well defined in New England as in Old England. Else why was no else why was one Mr. Plaistow for fraudulent obtaining corn from the Indians, condemned as punishment to be called Josias instead of Mr. as heretofore. His servant, who assisted in the fraud, was whipped. A Maine man named Thomas Taylor, for his undue familiarity shown in his theeing and thouing, Captain Rains was set in the stocks. Slander and name-calling were punished by whipping. On April Fool's 1634, John Lee, for calling Mr. Ludlow false heart knave, hard heart knave, heavy friend shall be whipped and fined 8 times. 6 months later, he was again in hot water. John Lee shall be whipped and fined for speaking reproachfully of the governor, saying he was but a lawyer's clerk. And what understanding had he more than himself, also taking the court for making laws to pick men's purses, also for abusing a maid of the governor, pretending love in the way of marriage, when himself professed he intended none. In the latter clause of this count against John Lee doubtless lay the sting of his offenses, for Governor Winthrop was very solicitous of the ethics of love-making, and to deceive the affections of one of his Fen County English serving lasses was to him without doubt a grave misdemeanor. Those harmless and irresponsible creatures, young lovers, were menaced by the whip. Read the extract from Plymouth Laws dated 1638. Whereas divers persons unfit for marriage, both in regard of the young years, as also in regard of their weak estate, some practicing and inveigling of men's daughters and maids under guardians contrary to their parents' and guardians' likings, and of maid servants, without the leave and liking of their masters. It is therefore enacted by the court that if any shall make a motion of marriage to any man's daughter or maid servant, not having first obtained leave or consent of the parents or masters so to do, shall be punished either by fine or corporal punishment, or both, at the discretions of the bench, and according to the nature of the offense. The New Haven colony, equally severe in unlicensed love-making, Jesus, I'm like guilty of every crime in this book, specified the unveigling, whether done by speech, writing, message, company keeping, unnecessary familiarity, disorderly night meetings, sinful dalliance, gifts, or as a final blow to inventive lovers in any other way. Wow. The New Haven magistrates had early given their word in favor of whipping post in these terms. Stripes and whippings is a correction fit and proper in some cases, where the offense is accompanied with childish or brutish folly, or rudeness, or with stubborn insolency, or best cruelty, or with idle vagrancy, or for faults of like nature. In the peculiar court of Connecticut this entry appears. The wounding was of the spirit, not of the body. May 12, 1668. Nicholas Wilton for wounding the wife of John Brooks, and Mary Wilton, the wife of Nicholas Wilton, for contemptuous and reproachful terms by her put on one of the assistants, are adjudged she to be whipped 6 stripes upon the naked body next training day at Windsor. And the said Nicholas is hereby disfranchised of his freedom in this corporation, and to pay for the horse and man that came with him to the court today, and for what damage he hath done to the said Brooks, his wife, and sit in the stocks the same day his wife is to receive her punishment. So they get the man and the wife. Crazy. In New York, a whipping post was set up on the Strand, in front of Stade Hughes under Dutch rule, and sentences were many. Few examples of the punishments under the Dutch may be given. A sailmaker, rioting and drink around New Amsterdam, cut one Van Brugh on the jaw. He was sentenced to be fastened to a stake, severely scourged, and a gash made in his left cheek, and to be banished. To the honor of Rue Van Brugh, let me add that she requested the court that these penalties should not be carried out, or at any rate done in a closed room. Well, there you go. That's cool. One Van Tergoes, for treasonable words of great flagrancy, was brought with a rope around his neck to half gallows, whipped, branded, and banished. Man, I've never been branded. I don't know, I've been burnt, but like that was just from like craziness, like bar stunts, I guess, like putting cigarettes out on yourself and shit like that, like dumb shit back when I was like a punk rocker and in high school, you know. I have a super high pain tolerance though. Honestly, that's why I kind of had the whole joking title page, because like I have this weird ability where I can turn my pain off, which is why in past podcasts I've made the joke of like I don't understand why the government didn't like use me as an MK Ultra like soldier, but I could be one and not know it. Like maybe one day a Men in Black will show up and then give me a trigger word and I'll just turn into like this ninja assassin, you know. My wife can tell you though, I can turn my pain off. I can turn my tickling off too. It's all in the mind, you know. You can learn to do that, and it's not something you learn overnight. I learned over years, but I learned how to basically flip a switch in my brain and she can't tickle me, and it drives her nuts. She hates it, but I can do the same thing with pain. Like I've had some like bad wounds and I just turn the pain off, you know, as weird as it sounds. I digress though. May 14th, 1750. New York Gazette. Tuesday last one David Smith was convicted in the mayor's court of taking or stealing goods off a shop window in this city, and was sentenced to be whipped at the cart's tail round this town, and afterwards whipped at the pillory, which sentence was accordingly executed on him. So the pillory, we got into that on a previous episode. I'll put it as like a card at the end of the video. You can click on it during the credits if you want. In the same paper, date October 2nd, 1752, an account is given of the pillorying of a boy for picking pockets and the whipping of an Irishman for stealing deerskins. Another man was whipped round the city for stealing a barrel of flour. In January 1761, 4 men for petty larceny were whipped at the cart tail round New York. In 1638, a whipping post was set up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, as a companion to the cage, for speaking opprobrious. This is an insane word, I can't even pronounce it. Opprobriusly. Yeah, I wouldn't even know how to say that. And even for suspicious speeches, New Haven citizens were whipped at the cart's podex. Rhode Island, even under the tolerant and gentle Roger Williams. Williams? I wonder if that's kinfolk to me. I'm gonna have to look into that. Had no idle whip. Larceny, drunkenness, perjury were punished at the whipping post. In Newport, malefactors were whipped at the cart until this century, which that was, like I gave earlier, the date of this book or pamphlet written. Mr. Channing tells of seeing them fastened to the cart and being thus slowly led through the streets to a public spot where they were whipped on the naked back. Women were at the time whipped in the jail yard with only spectators of their own sex. So at least they had the decency for that. In Plymouth, women were whipped at the cart tail, and the towns resounded with the blows dealt out to Quakers. In 1636, on a day in June, one Helen Billington was whipped in Plymouth for slander. There was a whipping post on Queen Street in Boston, another on the Common, another on State Street, and they were constantly in use in Boston in Revolutionary times. Samuel Breck wrote of the year 1771, "The large whipping post painted red stood conspicuously and prominently in the most public street in town. It was placed in the State Street directly under the windows of a great writing school which I frequented, and from there the scholars were indulged in the spectacle of all kinds of punishment, suited to harden their hearts and to brutalize their feelings. Here women taken in a huge cage, in which they were dragged on heels from prison and tied to the post with bare backs on which 30 or 40 lashes were bestowed among the screams of the culprit and the uproar of the mob." Bloodthirsty, man. We were bloodthirsty back then. The Diary of a Boston Schoolgirl of 12, little Anna Green Winslow, written the same year as Mr. Breck's account, gives a detailed account of the career of one Bet Smith through workhouse and gaol to whipping post, and thence to be set on the gallows, where she behaved with great impudence. Criminals were sentenced in lots. On September 9th, 1787, in one Boston court, one burglar was sentenced to be hanged, 5 thieves to be whipped, 2 greater thieves to be set on the gallows, and 1 counterfeiter set on the pillory. Cowper's account of the tender-hearted Beadle is supplemented by a similar performance in Boston as shown in a Boston paper of August 11, 1789. Even culprits were to receive in one day the discipline of the post. Another criminal was obtained by the sheriff to inflict the punishment, but he persisted in being tender of strokes. Though ordered by the sheriff to lay on, at last the sheriff seized the whip and lashed the whipper, then turned to the row of 9-pins and delivered the lashes. The citizens who were assembled complimented the sheriff with 3 cheers for the manly, determined manner in which he executed his duty. So common were whippings in the southern colonies at the date of settlement of the country that in Virginia even launderers and launderesses who dare to wash any unclean linen, drive bucks, or throw out the water or suds or foul clothes in the open streets, or who took pay for washing for a soldier or laborer, and who gave old torn linen for good linen, were severely whipped. Many other offenses were punished by whipping in Virginia, such as slitting the ears of hogs or cutting off the ends of hogs' ears, thereby removing earmarks and destroying claim to preemptory property. So basically cutting off their ears so they can't prove the tag, stealing tobacco, running away from home, drunkenness, destruction of land, and in 1664, Major Robbins brought suit against one Mary Powell for scandalous speeches against Reverend Mr. Tickle, for which she was ordered to receive 20 lashings on her bare shoulders and to be banished the country. Of course, for the correction of slaves, the whip was in constant use till our Civil War, banished slavery and the whipping post from every state save Maryland and Delaware. This latter named Commonwealth has been much censured for countenancing the continuance of whipping as a punishment. It is, however, stiffly contended by Delaware magistrates that as a restraint over wife-beaters and other cruel and vicious criminals, the whipping post is a distinct success and of marked benefit in its influence in the community. It should also be remembered that these are not the only civilized states to approve of whipping of certain crimes. About 30 years ago, when garroting became so frequent and so greatly feared in England, the whipping post was reestablished in England, and whipping once more became an authorized punishment. There was one hard-hearted and unjust use of the whip which was prevalent in London and other English cities in olden times, which I wish to recount with abjuration. At the time of public executions, parents were wont to whip their children soundly to impress upon them a lesson of horror of the gallows. Well, I didn't feel whipping. I felt a board against my butt. I don't know who else has, but as trivial offenses such as stealing anything in value over a shilling were punishable by death, and capital crimes were over 300 in number, executions were of deplorable frequency. Hence the condition of the children at the time was indeed pitiable. Whipped by most illogical parents, whipped by cruel teachers, even Roger Ashman used to pinch, nib, and bob Queen Elizabeth when she was his pupil. Whipped by masters, whipped by mistresses, it would seem that the moral force of the whipping post for adults must have been very slight after so many category experiences in youth. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it interesting. I definitely think that's brutal. Like I said, on this channel we cover some brutal subjects here and there, but I personally, I'm the type of guy, like, I like podcasts, like listening about serial killers or murderers or conspiracy theories. Sometimes I do get into the darker stuff, and I don't know, it's interesting. You know, as bad as it sounds, sometimes the negative and the scary and the dark and the brutal can be interesting, you know, especially as an American. Like, horror movies and stuff are something that's super popular here in the U.S. So, I don't know. Kind of shows you the true nature of what people find entertaining, I guess. But I hope you all have a good day. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you later.
We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.